A strange, solitary woman leaves the East behind, venturing into the wildlands of Montana, a place where she believes a rugged, cold-hearted man is waiting, only to turn her into a servant. But when the wooden door creaks open, instead of a harsh, merciless gaze, she finds the deep, gentle eyes of someone who has lost everything and still chooses kindness. If it were you, would you dare to leave behind everything familiar and step into the unknown, clinging only to the fragile hope that someone out there might understand your heart? Can love truly bloom between two people who have both been broken, or will the past once again pull them apart? Sometimes, choosing to stay even in silence is the bravest thing a human being can do. Join me on this journey through deserts, winds, and shattered hearts to discover that love doesn't come from perfection, but from two souls who refuse to give up. If you believe that love can heal, hit that like button, share, and subscribe, and let's begin this story together. The sound of iron wheels grinding on the rails blended with the wind howling outside the train window. The train was heading west through faded grasslands and white-topped mountains. Clara Mae Dawson pulled her wool coat tighter around her shoulders, her fingers clutching a letter that had already turned yellow with time. That letter, just a few short lines, had changed the course of her life. I promise nothing more than a roof, a full meal, and respect. If you agree to come to Montana, write back, Caleb Harlow. The handwriting was firm and even. No sweet words, no promises of love. And yet, to Clara, those few words felt more real than any flattery life had ever thrown her way. She looked out the window, her reflection faint on the glass against the snow. Once, she had been a schoolteacher in St. Louis, a husband, a little girl. Then, one winter's fever took them both, leaving behind a quiet room and a child's bed no one dared to touch. For 2 long years she drifted through gray days until a friend sent her a newspaper clipping, "Mail Order Brides Wanted, Montana Territory." She read it, folded it, and read it again for days, and one sleepless night. She took up a pen and wrote a single letter to a name she didn't know, a man she couldn't picture, Caleb Harlow. The train swayed gently. Clara opened a small wooden box in her lap. Inside was her wedding ring from her late husband. She touched it softly, then closed the lid. Some things you have to leave behind to survive. Across from her, an old woman asked kindly, "Where are you headed?" Dear Clara smiled faintly. "Dry Creek, Montana. I'm getting married to a man you've never met. Yes, to someone I only know through words on a page." The woman gave her a long, tender look, half pity, half prayer. "There are good men in this world, child, but there are cruel ones too. May the Lord watch over you." Clara only nodded, her smile quiet and small. She knew what she was walking into: a wild land, a widowed man, and a future that might not hold love at all. By late afternoon, the train pulled into its last stop. The whistle tore through the gray sky. Snowflakes, the first of the season, began to fall, tapping against the glass. The Dry Creek station was small, its roof heavy with snow. A few tall men waited under the eaves, hats wide-brimmed, coats dark and heavy. None of them smiled. The wind blurred everything in white. Clara stepped down carefully. Her boots slipped on the frozen ground. Her heart raced as she searched the crowd, whispering in her mind, "Caleb Harlow, Caleb Harlow." Then she saw him, a man standing apart from the rest, holding a horse by the reins. His eyes were steady but silent. A long leather coat, hat pulled low, skin weathered by sun and wind. A thin scar ran from his cheek down to his neck. He didn't move forward, just tilted his head slightly. "Are you Clara Mae Dawson?" "Yes, and you must be Mr. Harlow. Call me Caleb." His voice was rough, short, not unkind, but closed off somehow. He bent down, picked up her small suitcase, and tied it across his saddle. "The ranch is 10 miles out. Storm's coming. You ride I've ridden before, but not well. Hold tight to the reins. Stay close to me. No wasted words." She nodded, climbed up awkwardly, and steadied herself. The snow fell heavier now. The wind lashed across her face, cold enough to burn. Clara lowered her head, hearing only the horse's breath and Caleb's calm voice beside her. "When the wind blows against you, don't look too far ahead. Just follow the footprints in front of you." Simple words, yet her heart sank softly. In that moment, she felt he wasn't just talking about the trail, but about life itself. Darkness fell quick. They stopped to take shelter in an old barn on the side of a hill. Caleb built a small fire. His hands were rough, scarred. The flame danced across them like old memories. He said little, only handed her a wool blanket. Clara looked around, her voice trembling slightly. "Mr. Harlow, do you really mean to marry me?" He looked up, eyes gray, deep as a storm. "I don't need someone to order around. Don't need a servant." He paused, his voice low but steady. "I don't need someone to serve me. I need someone to stay." The fire popped softly between them. No sound but their breathing and the wind outside. Clara didn't know how to answer. Something in his tone, loneliness, worn and quiet, pressed gently against her chest. He turned away, the firelight flickering across his face, half in shadow, half in gold. A man carrying wounds no one could see. When she finally drifted to sleep, he was still awake, staring into the fire, eyes far and tired. Outside, the blizzard sealed the road behind them, as if the West itself had decided to keep them there, two strangers caught in the long night. But, for the first time in years, Caleb felt warmth not from the fire, but from another breath beside his own. By dawn, the storm had passed. The sun rose over the ridge, melting the snow in thin sheets of light. They rode again across the endless white of Montana, where the mountains caught the morning glow. Clara smiled softly. The fear of last night had faded. She didn't know what waited at that ranch, only that something in the man riding ahead made her want to believe just once more. The road to the ranch wound through the valley, blanketed in white pine and snow. The wind blew so hard the horses had to lower their heads, hooves crunching through layers of brittle ice. Clara fought to stay upright in the saddle, her hands gripping the reins until her fingers went numb. Caleb rode ahead, steady as stone snow piled on his shoulders, but his pace never slowed. Every now and then, he turned slightly and asked, "You all right?" "I'm fine," she answered. Though her hands could barely feel the leather, the sky hung heavy and gray. Thunder rolled in the distance, and the wind smelled of cold iron and smoke. The storm was coming faster than they'd thought. When they crossed a frozen stream, the snow thickened, wind roaring back against them. Clara's horse reared, frightened. She cried out, slipped from the saddle, and fell hard into the snow. Caleb was beside her in an instant, hauling her up with strong, warm hands. "Don't fight the wind," he said quietly. "Let it pass, then stand." She looked up at him, breath fogging in the frozen air. Her hair had come loose beneath her hood for a heartbeat. Their eyes met not cold, but still and deep, like water under ice. He helped her back on the horse, tied the reins of their mounts together so they wouldn't lose each other in the storm. The wind screamed across the valley, wild as a beast. They rode for miles through the whiteout before Caleb raised a hand. "Up ahead," he said, pointing toward a faint shadow of rock. "Old mining shed. We'll take shelter there." Through the trees, they found it a half-collapsed shack, walls warped, roof leaking. Caleb tied the horses in a corner, pulled a small tin box of matches from his coat, and coaxed a flame in an old iron pail. The fire sputtered to life, weak, but warm enough to chase the chill. Clara sank down near it, hands trembling as she held them close to the flame. Her eyes followed Caleb's rough, sun-browned hands as he hung his coat to dry. "Do storms like this come often?" she asked softly. "Not often," he replied, his voice low and steady, "but in Montana, you never can tell." The storm howled outside, but he spoke as if it were nothing more than rain on a roof. Silence filled the space, only the crackle of fire and the hiss of wind through the cracks. Clara studied him quietly, broad shoulders, calm face, that air of solitude wrapped around him like a second skin. He didn't look at her, only into the fire, half his face lit, half hidden in shadow. After a while, he reached into his saddlebag and pulled out some jerky and bread. He broke them in half, offered her a share. "Eat," he said. "You'll need your strength. Storm won't ease for another 2 hours." "Thank you," she murmured. "Call me Caleb." His tone softened, still short, but gentler. They ate in silence. Outside, the wind rumbled like a far-off sea. Clara shivered and drew the blanket closer. Caleb noticed, stood, and fed more wood into the fire. "The nights here are long," he said quietly, "but if you can make it through one like this, you'll stop fearing Montana." She smiled faintly, lips pale. "I'm not afraid of this land, just afraid I might not be strong enough to start again." He lifted his gaze, meeting hers. "No one's ever strong enough, Clara. We just get stronger, because life doesn't give us a choice." The words were deep and simple, like the sound of hooves over snow. Clara looked at him, and something inside her stirred a warmth, a sorrow, and a quiet understanding. What kind of pain, she wondered, had taught this man to speak that way when the fire dimmed? He pulled a heavier coat over her shoulders, then sat by the door, hand resting near his gun, eyes fixed outside. "You're not going to sleep?" she asked softly. "Can't," he said. "Wolves come close sometimes, and me. You sleep. Tonight, you're safe." The words were simple, but they landed like a promise. After years of carrying her own burdens, hearing someone say you're safe made her throat tighten. She said nothing more, only lay down, listening to the wind and the groan of the old wood. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, the fire still burned. When she finally slept, Caleb stayed awake, watching the door. In the flicker of flame, memories stirred the face of his late wife fading into smoke. Her scream when the barn collapsed, the fire's roar, his hand clenched unconsciously. He had sworn never to let anyone into his life again. But then came this woman, small, determined, trembling but brave, walking straight into the storm, and for the first time in years he didn't feel fear. He felt peace. By morning, the sky turned pale blue. Snow reached their knees outside. Caleb handed her a metal flask. 5 more miles, You'll see winter's first sunlight when we get there." Clara smiled, her lips cracked, eyes bright. She climbed onto her horse, steadier now, holding the reins firm. Caleb rode ahead, his silhouette stretching long across the snow. Sunlight broke over the distant ridges, painting the mountains gold. Neither of them spoke. Now and then, the wind carried the faint chime of the horse's tack, a sound warmer than any she had heard since losing her family. By noon, they crested a hill. Below, a wide valley opened up a long wooden fence, a curl of smoke rising from a chimney. Caleb reined in his horse, lifted a hand. "Coyote Hollow Ranch," he said, "my home, and yours too, if you'll have it." Clara followed his gaze. Amid the sea of white, the dark wooden house stood quiet and strong, smoke curling upward, a few horses feeding in the corral. Her heart tightened, not in fear, but in that strange ache that comes before a beginning. A new life, or perhaps another test. Caleb nodded toward the trail. "Come on. Lydia's probably got your room ready." "Lydia, my housekeeper, been here since my father's time?" Clara nodded softly. "I see." They rode on through the fence line, across a small creek whispering beneath ice. She didn't speak, just breathed in the scent of pine and smoke, the deep silence of the western wilds. Inside her, something shifted, a quiet mix of fear and hope. She knew she had left everything behind. But maybe this place, this land, this man was where she could start again. When the horses stopped at the porch, Caleb turned to her once more. "Welcome to Montana, Clara." His voice was gentle, like the wind itself, but to her it sounded like the beginning of a whole new life. A soft gust blew past, carrying the scent of snow and wood smoke, and for the first time since her long journey began, Clara felt a small, steady flame light up inside her heart. Caleb's house rose out of the wide, white plain. Coyote Hollow Ranch wasn't as large as Clara had imagined, but it stood solid. A wooden fence wrapped the horse pens and the vegetable patch, now fast asleep for winter. The main house was a block of dark timber, roof pitched, windows small. Smoke drifted thin from the chimney, the faint scent of burning pine mingled with coffee. At the door, an older woman with silver hair pinned high and a wool apron was shoveling ash from the stove. She looked up as they drew near. Caleb called out, "Lydia, this is Miss Dawson." Lydia wiped her hands on her apron and stepped forward. Lines marked her face, but her eyes were kind and keen. "Call me Lydia. Child, welcome to Coyote Hollow." Clara nodded, trying a smile. "It's very nice to meet you." Lydia studied her for a long breath, then said softly, "You look worn out." "The road from Dry Creek this time of year isn't for the faint of heart," Clara answered quietly. "I think I've learned my way around the cold." Caleb led the horses toward the pens. Clara moved to help, but Lydia stopped her. "Leave 'em be. My boss needs more time with the horses than with people." There was no mockery in her tone, just a simple truth. Clara only nodded and followed Lydia into the house. Inside was warm and dry. Smoke and wood and fresh-baked bread curled into one scent. The main room was wide yet spare, everything neat to the point of plain. On the wall hung a few old photographs, a young man in uniform, and another a dark-haired woman with a gentle smile, a child tucked close. Clara paused there. Lydia caught her glance and said softly, "Her name was Rebecca. She and the baby died when the barn burned 3 years ago." Clara shivered. Now she understood why the house felt cold, even with the fire going. Lydia led her to a small room behind the kitchen. "This used to be the sewing room, now it's yours." She pointed to a narrow wooden bed, a quilt, and a small window looking out over the hillside. "Thank you," Clara murmured. "No thanks needed. I'm only doing what's right. Out here, everyone does their part." With that, Lydia stepped out, leaving Clara in the quiet. Clara slipped off her coat and sat on the bed. Outside, wind breathed along the eaves. On the table sat a water pitcher and an oil lamp. Clara set Caleb's old letter on the table, then opened her valise for a worn-edged Bible, a small notebook, a few pens. She wrote a few lines, "First day in Montana." The man says little, but his eyes are deep as snow over a valley. Something in that look makes me afraid. It makes me want to stay and understand. Lydia tapped at the door and set down a tray of hot soup. "Eat. It'll be colder tonight. Do you know how he writes his letters?" Clara asked. Lydia smiled, half secret, half pity. "A man like him doesn't write letters, child. I wrote them. All he said was, 'If she agrees to come, we'll marry.' That was all." Clara blinked, stunned. So the words in that letter, that plain, steady choosing, belonged to this woman, not Caleb. "Why did you help?" she asked. "Because I'm tired of watching him live like a shadow. Maybe it'll take someone to remind him he's still alive." Lydia walked out, leaving Clara with hot soup and a tangle of thoughts. That night, she didn't sleep at once. Wind scraped along the roof. Wood creaked. She heard slow, even footsteps on the porch, fading away Caleb, she guessed, making his rounds at the horse pens. Clara rose, wrapped her coat, and slipped out to the porch. Snow had stopped. Moonlight washed the world in silver. Caleb stood a few paces off, leaning on the rail, looking down the valley, his breath feathered white in the cold. Clara hesitated, then said, "You haven't turned in yet. Can't sleep right after a storm." He answered, "Horses need to feel safe. Are they all right? Better than I expected." He turned, voice gentler. "Thank you for enduring the ride. Not easy for a city woman to come through a storm." She smiled, small. "I think my life has had worse storms than this." Caleb was quiet, only nodding. Moonlight drew pale light along the scar on his cheek. In the stillness, Clara realized his silence wasn't coldness. It was a weight of things he didn't know how to say. "Tomorrow, Lydia will show you around the ranch," he said, voice level. "If it doesn't suit you, I'll take you back to Dry Creek. Your choice. I've come this far. I'd like to stay a while." "All right," he said, then turned away. "Good night, Miss Dawson." As he stepped into the dark, Clara stayed, watching him go. From behind, he looked both strong and very alone. She went back in, heart full of questions. What had built the wall around this man so high and so thick? Morning found Lydia leading her over the place. Ice was loosening. Patches of yellow-gray grass showed through. Coyote Hollow counted about 20 horses, a few stock sheds, and a small garden gone brittle with winter. Lydia said that Rebecca had loved roses along the porch. But after her passing, Caleb let no one touch the garden. He says that ground should be left alone. Because he misses her, Clara asked. Perhaps. But sometimes leaving a thing too long kills the heart that keeps watch over it. In the afternoon, Clara helped Lydia bake bread and set the table. Caleb was quiet through supper, asking only now and then about the train. When Lydia rose to fetch coffee, Clara glanced at him and said softly, "I know the letter wasn't written by you, but I don't regret coming." He looked at her, caught off guard. "Lydia told you no one had to." "I could guess. Still, whoever penned it, the words brought me here. Maybe the Lord meant it so." Caleb didn't answer. He only bowed his head, hands tightening around the cup. It had been a long time since anyone spoke to him with that kind of trust. Night settled. Clara lay on the narrow bed, watching the firelight flicker through the crack in the door. She heard Caleb pacing the yard, the horses snorting softly. The first fear inside her eased away, replaced by something unfamiliar, as if, in this cold place, she had found a little corner of human warmth. She closed her eyes and whispered, "If I can be brave enough to stay, perhaps he'll come to believe he deserves to be loved again." Outside, the Montana wind moved along the eaves, no longer a fury, just a long, steady breath. Morning at Coyote Hollow began with the sound of horses and the smell of strong coffee. Clara woke before sunrise, frost clouding the window into a white blur. She pulled on her coat and stepped out to the porch. The ground sparkled with a thin glaze of ice. The air was sharp, but the pale blue sky carried a strange peace. Caleb was already at the stables. He stood brushing the mane of a black horse named Samson, morning light pooling on his leather coat. Clara stopped at the doorway, hesitating. "Good morning," she said. He looked up and nodded. "Mild weather today. You can take a look around. You're up early. Ranch life. Horses don't wait." She smiled and walked closer. He handed her a wooden brush. "Give it a try." Clara pressed her hand to the horse's flank, warm, coarse, alive. Samson flinched once, then settled. "He's gentler than I thought." "Because you're not afraid," Caleb said, a rare spark of warmth in his eyes. "Horses can feel fear, same as people." They worked side by side in silence, the scrape of brush, the horse's quiet breath, the rhythm of life returning to the day. A peace simple and deep. Inside, Lydia was busy with breakfast. When the two came in, she glanced up with a knowing smile. "Well, the boss talks more this morning than I've heard in a week." Caleb said nothing, hung his hat on the wall peg. Clara flushed and sat down. Breakfast was simple cornbread, eggs, and coffee, but full of warmth. Afterward, Lydia asked Clara to help bake and dust the parlor. While wiping the shelves, Clara noticed an old guitar resting on a stand. She ran her fingers along the strings, still whole, still waiting. "Does he play?" she asked. Lydia shook her head. "Not since Miss Rebecca died. Used to hear music every night. Now, just quiet." Clara lingered by the guitar for a moment, a weight settling in her chest. She wondered if that music would ever fill the house again. That afternoon, Caleb spread a map across the table. He sat sketching, occasionally glancing toward the window. Clara passed by and paused. "What are you drawing?" "A new water line. Come spring, I'll open pasture east of the ridge. You do all that yourself, used to have 2 hands helping. Now it's just me and Lydia. Don't worry about it. I could help. I'm good with maps and numbers." Caleb looked up, surprised. "You taught at a school." "Yes, geometry and a bit of geography." He studied her for a moment, then slid the map toward her. "If you want to try, here's your chance." Clara sat and took the pencil. She traced the stream winding through the hollow, careful and sure. Caleb watched, his mouth easing into a small smile. "You do fine work. Thank you. I think I'll learn to fit in with Montana soon." He nodded lightly. "Maybe Montana's been needing someone like you." The words caught her off guard, steady, honest, kind. It had been a long time since anyone spoke to her that way. By dusk, snow began to fall again. Lydia stoked the fire while Caleb checked the fences. Clara stayed inside to help with supper. As they worked, Lydia said quietly, "The boss doesn't trust easy. But this morning, seeing him let you handle Samson, I knew something's changing." Clara smiled softly. "I didn't think he was that easy to get close to. He's not, but he isn't cruel, just kept too long in the dark. That night, they ate late." Caleb told stories of storm seasons, lightning striking the barn, the war years in Virginia. Clara listened, eyes never leaving him. When he spoke of losing his wife, his voice sank low. "I couldn't save them. I was out in the field when the fire started. By the time I came running, there was nothing left." Clara didn't answer. She simply placed her hand on the table near his. A small gesture, but enough to make him pause. He didn't pull away. Silence, deep and fragile, said more than words could. When Lydia left to fetch more coffee, Caleb murmured, "No need to pity me." "Clara, I don't," she said gently. "I just know what loss feels like." He looked at her, something raw in his eyes, then stood and turned toward the window. "I'll check on the horses." Clara sat, watching the fire flicker low. She knew he needed the quiet, but still, something drew her outside. She pulled on her coat and followed. Snow blanketed the yard in white. Caleb was fastening a bridle, patting the neck of a brown mare. "It's freezing," he said. "You should stay in. I couldn't sleep." He nodded. They stood side by side, looking at the fallen snow soft as ash. "Do you ever think about starting over?" she asked. He exhaled, the breath curling white. "I used to think I couldn't, but sometimes life sends someone your way, and you've got to learn to believe again." Clara's voice was quiet. "And if that person's afraid too, but stays anyway." He turned to her, eyes catching the faint firelight from the stables. "Then I'd say that's the bravest thing I've ever seen." A long pause. The wind whispered under the eaves. Clara smiled faintly. "I guess I'm learning to be brave a little at a time." Caleb smiled, too small. "True, and warm. Montana has a way of teaching that." When they came back inside, Lydia was still awake, mending a coat by the fire. She looked up, saw the flicker of a smile on Caleb's face, and said nothing. In her eyes, a quiet hope glimmered. Maybe this long winter would end sooner than most. That night, Clara wrote in her notebook, "Today. I heard him laugh, just a small smile, but I know it's the beginning of something good." Spring came slow to Coyote Hollow. The snow melted into trickling streams between the rocks, and young grass crept across the meadows. The air felt lighter now, and Clara noticed that Lydia's smile came more often. As for Caleb, still quiet, still measured, he sometimes stood for long minutes on the porch, watching the sun climb over the ridge. One morning, Clara went out to the back garden. The patch of land once left untouched was dark and soft now that the frost had lifted. She knelt, scraping away the last thin crust of ice, and pressed a few dry rose seeds into the soil seeds Lydia had found in an old box. "Rebecca used to grow them here," Lydia said. "No one's touched that ground in 3 years." Clara stayed silent, her hand in the dirt. Maybe it's time the earth was allowed to breathe again. Lydia only nodded. From that day, Clara tended the patch each morning. She knew Caleb saw her. He passed by often, but he said nothing, only paused a moment, eyes unreadable. One afternoon, as she covered the soil with straw, he stopped beside her. "Rebecca loved roses," he said quietly. "I thought I'd never be able to see them again." Clara looked up. The evening sun caught the strands of her hair. "Flowers don't need the same hands to bloom," she said. "They just need earth, water, and light." He was silent for a long moment, then nodded. "If you want to plant them, plant them. I'll help you build the fence around." The next days, they worked together. He cut wood, she tied wire. Lydia brought coffee from the porch. They spoke little, but every shared glance, every rhythm of their hands began to feel easy. When the fence was done, Caleb stood still, looking over the garden as wind stirred his hair. "I'd forgotten what it's like," he murmured, "when something starts to live again." Clara smiled. "Sometimes, one small seed is all it takes to remind us we can still hope." That evening, Lydia asked Clara to tidy the parlor. As Clara dusted the old guitar on the shelf, Lydia sighed. "That thing's been silent too long." Clara set it on the table, brushing the tarnished strings. "If it still plays, I'd like to hear it." "Then go on," Lydia said, half smiling. "Just be gentle. The boss might not like it." Clara sat down and strummed. The sound was rough, uncertain, but alive. She tuned a few strings, then began a soft hymn, one she used to sing in church back home. Her voice trembled a little, but it was warm, full of feeling. The door creaked open. Caleb stood there, half in shadow. He didn't speak. He simply listened until the last note faded. When she lowered the guitar, he stepped closer. "I didn't think anyone remembered that song. In St. Louis, we sang it every Easter." He touched the wood lightly, tracing the grain. "Rebecca used to play that piece. I thought I'd never hear it again." Clara's voice was soft, "But now you have." His eyes lifted to hers, and for once, the hardness was gone. "Thank you, Clara." That night, after Lydia had gone to bed, the two sat by the fire. For the first time, Caleb spoke of Rebecca, how she laughed easily, loved music, and used to make him play even when his fingers fumbled. "She died on a storm night," he said. "Lightning hit the barn. By the time I got back, the fire had already taken them." His voice cracked slightly. "I couldn't touch a guitar after that." Clara stayed silent for a long time. "I lost my husband and my daughter to fever," she said at last. "For a while, I thought I'd died too, but the living we have to keep going. Somehow." Caleb looked at her. For the first time, his eyes held no distance. "Maybe God sent you here to remind me of that." A draft stirred the fire. The flame swayed and steadied. They sat in quiet, the kind that heals instead of hurts. The next morning, Clara rose early to bake bread. Through the window, she saw Caleb outside teaching the neighbor's boy how to mend a saddle. He laughed an easy, honest sound. It startled her. She hadn't known his voice could carry warmth like that. At noon, Lydia invited the boy to stay for lunch. When he left, Clara carried the guitar to the porch. "Will you play something?" she asked. Caleb hesitated, then took the instrument. His fingers brushed the strings. A deep, weathered tone filled the air. He played slowly, each note blending with the wind that swept through the valley. Clara closed her eyes. Listening, it was the sound of the earth breathing again. When he stopped, she said softly, "See? The sound was always there. It just needed someone brave enough to wake it." He smiled faintly. "Maybe you're right. I'm just not sure I'm ready to wake everything." You don't have to, she said. Just one thing, believe that your heart still remembers how to love. Later. Lydia stood by the kitchen window, watching through the glass. Out on the porch, Caleb was showing Clara how to tune the guitar, his hand brushing the neck near hers. Close enough their breasts mingled in the cool air. Lydia smiled, a mix of joy and worry. She'd seen enough springs to know how fragile beginnings could be. That night, Clara wrote in her notebook. He smiled again, and when he played, I wanted to cry, not from sadness, but because life suddenly felt softer than I ever thought it could. Days later, the first rosebud broke through the soil. Caleb stopped beside the fence, crouched low. They're alive, he said quietly. Clara smiled, just like us. He nodded, then said, his voice rough but gentle, Clara, I'm no good with fancy words, but if you think of this place as home, I'll make sure you're safe here. She met his gaze. I don't need someone to keep me safe. I just need someone to stay. Caleb's eyes softened, then stay. A breeze swept past them, stirring the tender petals. Montana glowed beneath the evening sun, and in Clara's heart, something had truly changed, not a dream, not a promise, but the quiet beginning of love reborn. May arrived in Montana on warm winds, carrying the scent of young grass and the whisper of streams. Cowboy Hollow had grown lively again. Neighbors stopped by. The mares gave birth, and Clara's rose garden began to bud. Life seemed peaceful, until one afternoon when Lydia came inside, her face pale. Caleb, she said, there's someone at the gate. Caleb rose, still holding an oil rag. Who is it? Man from town. Well-dressed. Says he needs to speak to you about land. Caleb stepped outside, crossing the wide yard. A stranger waited by the fence, long, gray coat, thin smile. Mr. Harlow, he said, I'm Charles Benton, representing the Helena Railroad Company. We'd like to discuss purchasing the eastern section of your ranch. Caleb's eyes hardened. That land's not for sale. You may want to reconsider, Benton replied smoothly. The new line will pass through this valley. The company's prepared to pay double its worth. I don't want your money. Benton's smile tightened. You understand, if the county deems it necessary, they can seize it for public use. I'd hate to see this become unpleasant. Caleb said nothing, but his fists curled. From the porch, Clara saw the tendons stand out on his wrist. She stepped down, her voice calm but firm. You've had your answer, sir. It's time you left this property. Benton turned to her, eyebrow raised. And you are someone who lives here. Then perhaps you don't understand business. I'll return soon. Mr. Harlow, think it over. He tipped his hat, mounted his horse, and rode off, leaving a trail of dust in his wake. Caleb watched him go, jaw tight. They won't stop, he said. You can't fight a railroad company alone, Clara murmured. I've seen them do this before. First comes the offer, then the threats. What will you do? Keep this land, no matter what it takes. His voice was low and rough, like the wind moving through stone. That night, Clara found him on the porch, the old map spread across his knees. She sat beside him. That eastern land, is it that important? It holds the spring. If they take it, this ranch dies. My father broke this soil with his own hands. I swore I'd keep it whole. She watched him in the lamplight, his face lined with fatigue and stubborn pride. If you'd like, she said softly, I can help draft a petition, maps, water charts, a letter to the county. He looked at her, his expression easing. Aren't you afraid, Clara?" She smiled faintly. "I used to be afraid of losing everything. Now I'm only afraid of doing nothing when I could stand and fight." The days that followed were restless. Clara wrote letters and drew maps while Caleb met with neighboring ranchers. Lydia kept the meals going and listened to the rumors that spread through Dry Creek. "Benton's not the kind to back down," she warned. "I know," Caleb said, "but no one's taking this land from us." One evening, Caleb rode out to meet the ranchers' council. Clara stayed behind, finishing the documentation. A knock came at the door light, deliberate. When she opened it, Benton stood there again, that same thin smile cutting across his face. "Is Mr. Harlow in?" "No," Clara said, wary. "He's gone." "Good," Benton replied. "I wanted a private word. There's nothing to discuss." "Oh, I think there is. You're an educated woman. Surely you understand that if he keeps resisting, he'll lose everything. You don't want that, do you?" Her voice sharpened. "Are you threatening us? I'm simply telling you the truth. Out here, accidents happen." His gaze drifted over her in a way that made her blood run cold. "I'll tell Caleb what you said." "Do that," he said, stepping back. "But remember, no one stands in the way of a train." He turned and rode off, leaving the night colder behind him. When Caleb returned, Clara told him everything. He clenched his fists, anger flashing in his eyes. "I knew he'd try something foul." He slammed his hat on the table. "If they touch you or Lydia—" "I swear, Caleb," she said quickly, "that's what they want to push you into rage. If you lose control, they win." He took a breath, then another, his shoulders trembling. "I just can't bear to lose again. Fire took everything once. I can't let it happen twice." Clara placed her hand over his. "You won't lose, not this time. We'll hold the line together." That night, sleep wouldn't come. Moonlight spilled cold across the wooden floor. Outside, she heard Caleb's boots pacing the yard, steady and heavy. He didn't know she was awake. Watching his shadow pass beneath the silver sky, a man shaped by loss, still carrying the weight of a promise. At dawn, Clara went to the garden. The first rose had bloomed deep red, trembling in the breeze. Lydia joined her, smiling softly. "You see, anything tended with patience will bloom when it's ready." Clara brushed the petal gently. "I only hope people can do the same." "Some already are," Lydia said, glancing toward the stables, where Caleb was mending a fence in the morning sun. That afternoon, the ranchers gathered at Caleb's house. Clara stood quietly, taking notes as the men spoke of petitions and signatures. Caleb said little, but every word carried weight. "This land feeds families. We don't sell our memories for a train." When the meeting ended, one man clapped him on the shoulder. "Benton's a dangerous sort. Be careful." "Caleb." He only replied, "I've fought in worse wars. I'm not afraid of a man's shadow." That night, rain came hard. Thunder cracked across the sky. Clara flinched at each flash, old fear flickering to life. She found Caleb on the porch, watching the lightning. "Are you afraid of fire?" she asked quietly. "No," he said. "I'm afraid of losing people. You won't lose anyone again." He turned, eyes dark and searching. "You make it sound easy, because I believe it. Anyone who's lost everything and still stands, they're stronger than the storm." Caleb studied her for a long time, then nodded slowly. "Thank you, Clara. I think I forgot how to believe in anything." Outside, thunder rolled on. Inside, the oil lamp burned steady and gold. On the table lay the papers she'd been writing, still open, ink not yet dry. We do not defend land alone. We defend the spirit of the West. And in her heart, something fierce and bright began to take root. Not fear, but resolve. She knew the real storm was still coming, but for the first time, she didn't feel alone. Summer swept across Montana fast and dry, carrying red dust and the scent of sun-baked grass. The horses were strong again. The fields shone gold beneath the wide sky, and for a while, peace seemed to settle over Coyote Hollow. But Clara felt it, that faint unease hovering like a storm cloud. Caleb grew quieter each day, his eyes often fixed toward the east, where the railroad men were staking new lines across the valley. One afternoon, Lydia returned from town, her face grim. "Caleb," she said, "word is, Benton's men have started threatening the other ranchers. Someone's fences got cut. Another man lost his cattle." Caleb rose slowly, his gaze darkening. "I've seen this before." Clara frowned. "You think they'll come here? They will. And they'll come at night." That night, Clara couldn't sleep. The wind howled against the eaves. The lamp flickered weakly by the window. Outside, Caleb's silhouette moved back and forth by the stables. She watched him from the door, her stomach tight with dread. Then a sudden scream of a horse, wild and terrified. Clara bolted upright. "Caleb!" she shouted, running outside. Flames tore through the south stable, climbing fast up the dry timber. Caleb was already there, shouting orders, his coat whipping the air as he fought the fire. "Water," he yelled. Lydia came running with a bucket, coughing from the smoke. Clara grabbed another and ran to the well. "Get back, Clara!" Caleb shouted. No, Samson's still in there. Before he could stop her, she dashed inside. The heat clawed at her face. Smoke stung her eyes. She found the horse's stall, cut the rope, and threw the door wide. Samson burst through, nearly knocking her over. Caleb pulled her out just as the roof gave way behind them. They tumbled to the ground, coughing, choking, covered in ash. Lydia rushed to them. "Lord, have mercy, who would do such a thing?" Caleb stood. The flames reflected in his eyes the eyes of a man who'd seen war. "They wanted to scare me," he said hoarsely. "They picked the wrong man. By morning, the fire had burned itself to ashes among the blackened ruins." Caleb found strange hoof prints, not from any local ranch. "From Helena," he muttered. "Benton," Clara whispered. Caleb nodded grimly. "Yeah, but I won't let him win." He sent a rider to the county office with their evidence and a written demand for investigation. Clara helped him draft the letter crisp, steady words that spoke of both loss and defiance. She was no longer just a schoolteacher from St. Louis. She'd become his partner, sharp-minded, calm, unyielding, watching them from the porch. Lydia shook her head, half in awe. "You two fit together," she said, "like earth and rain didn't like each other at first, but one can't live without the other." Clara smiled but said nothing. Something tender was taking root in her heart. Frightening, but real. She feared it, the way a survivor fears joy. That afternoon, she brought Caleb a jug of water while he cleared the charred beams. He drank deeply, sweat streaking down his dusty neck. "Thanks," he said quietly. "You shouldn't do this alone. I've lost one barn to fire. I won't lose another." Her voice softened. "You're not alone anymore." He looked up, the tension in his face easing. "I know. That night, peace returned fragile. But there, Lydia slept early, and Clara sat on the porch with her notebook open under the lamp. She wrote, "The fire took the stable, but it couldn't take what's growing inside me, a faith that he's learning to live again, and that love might still find its way through ashes." A week later, the county men arrived to inspect the ruins. They took notes, sketched maps. Charles Benton came too, polished boots and all. "Terrible tragedy," he said smoothly, "but progress comes with risk. Mr. Harlow, the railroad will bring prosperity to this valley." Caleb's voice was cold. "Prosperity shouldn't be built on someone else's ashes." Benton smirked. "You'll regret your stubbornness." As he rode off, Clara saw Caleb's hands tremble. "Do you trust the county to help?" she asked softly. He shook his head. "They're already bought. It's just us now." Days passed. Caleb rebuilt, hammering, sawing, sweating through the heat. Clara and Lydia planted vegetables, tended the roses, mended what the fire hadn't touched. Through the long afternoons, the sound of Caleb's hammer echoed steady across the fields, a rhythm of resilience. One evening, Clara brought him coffee. He sat on a pile of lumber, staring at the half-finished barn. "Aren't you afraid they'll come again?" she asked. "I am," he said simply, "but I learned from you being afraid and doing it anyway. That's courage." She smiled, sitting beside him, "and I learned from you how to stand up after everything's burned down." They sat together, silence stretching soft between them. The moonlight washed the yard silver. The roses glowed faintly along the fence. Rebecca used to say roses grow strongest after the storm. Caleb murmured. "Maybe she was right," Clara said gently. He turned toward her, his eyes warm now. "I thought I couldn't love again, Clara, but I think I was wrong." Her breath caught. "You don't have to say anything," she whispered. "I do," he said, his voice low but sure, "because if I don't, I'll regret it." He took her hand, rough, warm, trembling slightly. "I don't make easy promises, but I want you here, with me." Tears stung her eyes. "I almost left after the fire," she confessed, "but I can't now." "Then don't," he said, smiling for the first time, a real, unguarded smile. They sat there hand in hand beneath the moonlight. The old windmill creaked softly in the distance, keeping time with their hearts. And within them, another kind of fire began, warm, gentle, enduring, inside the house. Lydia peered through the window, then quietly closed the door. She smiled to herself and murmured, "At last, fire doesn't just destroy it, gives light." August painted Montana in gold. The rose garden at Coyote Hollow was in full bloom, deep crimson petals glowing like embers, their scent drifting softly through the porch. Most afternoons, Clara sat beside them with a book or her worn journal. Since the night Caleb confessed his feelings, the air between them had shifted warmer, steadier. They didn't need words anymore. Every glance, every quiet movement said enough. That morning, Lydia brought out 2 cups of coffee and set them down. "Girl," she said, smiling, "the man of this house smiles more these days." Clara followed her gaze toward the corral, where Caleb was showing a neighbor's boy how to calm a restless colt. "I think he's learning how to live again," she said softly. And you, Lydia, asked, "Maybe I'm learning how to love without fear of losing." Lydia chuckled, though her eyes still carried worry. She knew the storm wasn't over. Benton's shadow still lingered. That afternoon, Caleb returned from town, face tight and grim. "They've started laying track," he said, setting his hat down. "Less than 10 miles from here." Clara's heart sank. Didn't the county stop them? They looked the other way, Money speaks louder than justice. His fists clenched. I can't let them cut through this valley. What will you do? I'll face them. Alone. Clara reached for his hand, firm and unyielding. No. If you go, I'm going with you. He opened his mouth to protest, but her eyes stopped him soft yet fierce. He exhaled slowly. Fine, but you stay behind me. 2 days later, they rode out together. The land ahead was torn open mounds of dirt, piles of timber, and the sharp clang of iron. Dozens of laborers worked under the sun. Charles Benton stood at the center, map in hand, smirk on his face. Mr. Harlow, Miss Dawson, he greeted. I suppose you've come to sign over your land. Caleb's reply was flat. No, I came to tell you this valley belongs to the ranchers. If you keep pushing, we'll take it to court. Benton's laugh was cold. Court out here. Law belongs to the man with the biggest purse. Then you'll face the whole valley, Clara said, her voice calm but sharp. We have a petition signed by every rancher in Dry Creek. Benton faltered for half a heartbeat, then shrugged. You're wasting your time. The railroad is the future. You can't stop what's coming. There are things the future shouldn't destroy. Caleb answered evenly, like memory, like decency. Benton's eyes flashed with hatred. You'll regret this. They rode home in silence. The wind carried the scent of smoke from the north, and Clara's chest tightened an omen she couldn't name. That night, Lydia was ladling soup when the thunder of hooves broke through the quiet. A neighbor burst through the door, gasping, Caleb. The north field's on fire, the wind's pushing it this way. Caleb grabbed his rifle and ran. Clara and Lydia followed. Across the valley, flames tore through the dry grass, roaring in the wind. Men shouted, horses screamed. Caleb called orders, buckets, blankets, dig a line here. Clara joined the chain, her eyes stinging from smoke. A burning cinder struck her arm, searing pain, but she didn't stop. There she cried, pointing toward the rose fence. Caleb rushed over, slamming a wet blanket onto the fire. They fought the blaze until dawn, until nothing but gray smoke rose over the charred fields. When it was finally over, the ranch still stood. Clara collapsed onto the ground, chest heaving. Caleb knelt beside her, brushing ash from her sleeve. You're hurt. It's nothing. Are you all right? He managed a tired smile. We saved the house. That's what matters. She looked at him, eyes glistening. They'll come back. Maybe, he said quietly. But next time, I'll be ready. Within days, word spread across the valley. The ranchers united, demanding an official inquiry. The sheriff promised to look into it, which meant nothing. But something unexpected happened. Benton was suspended. A new representative was sent from Helena Edward Finch, a small, soft-spoken man who asked to meet Caleb and Clara to hear both sides. The meeting took place at the Dry Creek courthouse. Finch was nothing like Benton, calm, careful, eyes sharp behind his spectacles. He studied Clara's reports, the maps she had drawn, the details of the underground springs. What you've documented is thorough, he said. If this is accurate, the proposed route would disrupt the entire watershed. I'll see that this is reviewed at higher levels. When they stepped out into the sunlight, Clara smiled faintly. Maybe God still remembers us. Caleb nodded, but his voice was guarded. I've learned not to trust easy victories. Benton doesn't lose quietly. He was right. 2 weeks later, Benton returned thinner, meaner. He found Clara alone while Caleb was away, "I warned you," he hissed. "You made things worse. Now Harlow will pay for it." Clara stood firm, voice steady. "I'm not afraid of you." He laughed a low, bitter sound. "You lie badly." Then, a sharp click, Lydia appeared in the doorway, holding an old rifle steady. "Get off this land." "Benton," she said coldly. "Before I forget, I'm too old to shoot straight." Benton froze, then sneered. "You old fool. This isn't over." He turned his horse and rode off, leaving only dust and the echo of his threat. When Caleb returned, Clara told him everything. He was silent for a long time, then said quietly, "I used to think hate only weakens a man, but now I know some things must be protected, even if it means facing the dark." Clara reached for his hand. "Then let me face it with you." He clasped her hand firmly. "You will. I'm not letting you out of my sight again." That night, the wind swept through the valley carrying the faint smell of burnt grass. But inside Coyote Hollow, the oil lamp still burned. Two figures sat by its glow quiet, steadfast as if they both knew after every storm, the earth grows green again. Autumn crept into Montana slowly, the air cooler, the light softer, but the scent of burnt grass still lingered, dry and bitter. The northern field remained a scar of blackened earth, save for a few stubborn rose bushes pushing through the ashes. Every morning, Clara walked there with a bucket, sometimes only to kneel and press her palm against the soil, feeling its faint warmth, a quiet reminder that life never truly dies. It only sleeps. Caleb had grown quieter since Benton's last return. He worked endlessly mending fences, tending the horses, but Clara could feel the tension beneath his calm, like a stone pressing against his chest. One night, after Lydia had gone to bed, Clara found him sitting alone in the stable, the oil lamp casting tired shadows across his face. "You can't sleep?" she asked gently. He shook his head. "No, you're still thinking about Benton. Not just him." His voice came low, rough as gravel. "I keep thinking about losing everything again. The fire took Rebecca, the house, my faith. Now I'm afraid it'll take you too." Clara walked closer and sat beside him. "You can't stop every fire, Caleb, but you can believe this time. You won't face it alone." He looked at her, pain and tenderness flickering in his eyes. "You don't know what I did, Clara. When the fire came, I ran in for Rebecca. She was trapped under the roof beam. I couldn't lift it. His voice cracked. I left her there." Clara was silent for a long moment before she spoke. "You didn't abandon her. You survived her. And sometimes surviving is its own act of redemption." He lowered his head, shoulders trembling. Clara reached out, resting her hand on his arm. The lamplight flickered softly, and, for that brief, trembling moment, the walls between them disappeared no longer, rancher and stranger, but two souls touching through unseen wounds. By morning, Lydia sensed something had shifted. Clara came into the kitchen, eyes tired but lightened somehow, as if she'd set down a weight. Lydia only smiled and said nothing. There are things, she knew, that don't need to be spoken, but peace never lasts long on the frontier. Around midday, a letter arrived from Helena. It was from Edward Finch. "The company has revised its plans. The new line will bypass Coyote Hollow. Charles Benton is under investigation for property damage, but he's gone missing." Caleb folded the letter slowly. If he's disappeared, it means he's waiting. "You think he'll come back?" Clara asked. "Benton doesn't know how to lose." He was right. 2 nights later, As the first chill of autumn swept through the valley, strange noises echoed from the stable. Caleb grabbed his rifle and ran, Clara close behind. In the darkness, a figure darted toward the hills. "Stop!" Caleb shouted, firing a warning shot. The sound of hooves faded into the wind, leaving only a few footprints and a torn scrap of gray fabric. Caleb held it up. The smell of kerosene burned his nose. He was going to start another fire. Clara gripped his arm. "You can't go after him alone. I won't let him vanish again," Caleb said, jaw set. Before dawn, he saddled his horse. "I'm heading for the abandoned mining site," he told her. "That's where he'll hide. Stay here. Protect Lydia. Protect the ranch. If I'm not back by sundown, send word to Dry Creek." That day stretched longer than any day Clara could remember. She made soup she couldn't eat, paced the porch, and stared toward the ridge until her eyes burned. Lydia sat quietly sewing. "Sometimes," she said, "a man has to face his own darkness before he can come home." "And if the darkness wins," Clara whispered, "then we keep the lamp lit until he finds his way back." By late afternoon, the sky turned violet, the wind rising. When the last light touched the roses, a horse appeared on the trail. Caleb, covered in dust and blood, was leading another rider, bound and battered. "It's done," he said, voice rough. "He came at me first, but now he'll stand trial." Clara rushed forward, touching his arm. "You're hurt." "Just a scratch," he said with a faint smile. Their eyes met, weary, relieved, and full of something unspoken yet understood. The sheriff arrived soon after, taking Benton into custody. As they dragged him away, Benton twisted to sneer at Clara. "You think you've won. There are no happy endings in the West." She held his gaze and answered quietly. "We don't need happy endings, only the strength to stay." That night, rain came the first in months. It fell hard against the roof, the smell of wet earth rising like forgiveness. Caleb stood on the porch, letting it hit his face. Clara joined him, offering a towel. "Rain washes things clean," she said. He smiled faintly. "Maybe even me. You don't have to erase the past. Caleb," she said softly, "just learn to live with it." He turned to her, eyes warm and unguarded. "Do you know why I stayed in Montana, even after losing everything, 'cause this is your home? Because I believed someday someone would come along, someone who'd make this place mean something again." He took her hand gently. "And you did." Clara tilted her head, raindrops tracing down her hair. "Then let's make this place ours, not just land, but life." He leaned in, pressing a slow, tender kiss to her forehead, a promise more than a confession. Inside, Lydia watched through the window, smiling to herself. At last, she murmured, "Two lost souls have found their way." That night, Coyote Hollow slept beneath the rain. The roses bowed under the weight of water, each droplet gleaming like tears not of grief, but of cleansing. And somewhere deep in the quiet heart of Montana, the final storm had passed. Autumn spread across Montana in a haze of soft gold birch leaves glowing under the sun. The air scented with wood smoke and the hush of wind rolling through the valley. After the Benton affair, Coyote Hollow could finally breathe again. The pastures were coming back to life, green shoots pushing through the blackened soil, and the rose bushes stubborn as ever bloomed one more time before the frost. Sometimes Clara still couldn't quite believe it was over, but every morning, when she opened her eyes and saw Caleb out in the yard, sleeves rolled, shoulders broad beneath the rising sun, she knew that peace was real. Caleb had changed. The guarded man who once hid behind work had learned to open up again. He spoke to the neighboring ranchers, went to church on Sundays. Once, Clara caught him in the middle of a circle of children, showing them how to tie a saddle strap, his voice calm, his eyes gentle. That man, Lydia said, watching from the porch, has finally come home to himself. One morning, while Clara was pulling carrots from the garden, Caleb approached. "There's a letter from St. Louis," he said, handing her an envelope. She wiped her hands and opened it. A friend from her old school wrote to say the academy wanted her back. Clara read it in silence. Caleb asked quietly. "Will you go? I don't know," she said after a moment. "I once thought teaching was what I was born for. But now, I'm not sure my heart still belongs to St. Louis." "Clara," he began, hesitant, as if afraid that one wrong word might shatter the fragile calm between them. "If you stay," he said finally, "I don't want you to be a guest here or just a helper. I want you to belong here, to belong with me." She froze. "Are you?" "Yes," he said, a shy smile touching his lips. "I'm not a man of many words, but I know what I want. I don't need someone who comes and goes. I need someone who stays." Simple words, yet they struck deep, steady as the roots beneath the valley. All the storms, the losses, the fires, everything they had survived together folded into that moment. No grand vows, just truth. "I'll stay," Clara whispered, "not because I must, but because I want to." He said nothing more, only took her hand, and in the rough warmth of his palm, she felt something stronger than any promise quiet. Certain. Real. From that day on, their life unfolded not as a romance of thunder and lightning, but as the slow rhythm of two hearts in step. Caleb still rose early for the fields, but he always left a note on the kitchen table. "I'll be home late today. Don't forget lunch," or "3 new roses bloomed this morning." Clara smiled every time she read them, the clumsy tenderness of a man who once lived in silence, now learning how to speak in small, careful ways. Lydia, ever watchful, gave them space. She often sat on the porch knitting while their laughter drifted up from the garden. "This house has laughter again," she said one evening. "Rebecca must be smiling somewhere." Caleb laughed softly. "You give us too much credit." "No," Lydia replied. "A woman only stays when a place and a man are worth believing in." That afternoon, as the sun dipped low across the hills, Caleb and Clara walked side by side through the meadow. The wind carried the scent of fresh grass and the whisper of crickets. They didn't need words. When they reached the stream, Caleb pointed toward the small wooden bridge. "I'm going to fix that before winter. The river rises fast." "I'll help," she offered. He shook his head. "You'll help by sitting right here and reading something to me." She laughed, opened her journal, and read softly, "Some wounds don't need mending, only the brush of another hand, and time will sew them shut with light. Some homes aren't built of timber and nails, but of trust and quiet peace." He paused his hammering, looking at her eyes filled with gratitude, with something tender and wordless. "You always find the words. I can't," he said, "because I've felt what you feel," she replied. Then, without warning, rain came swift and sweet. They ran for the porch, soaked and laughing like children. Caleb draped a blanket around her shoulders, his voice low. "I used to think happiness was for the lucky, but maybe it's just for the ones who don't give up." She smiled through the rain. "See, even the sky's blessing us." They sat together, listening to the rain drum on the roof, the scent of coffee, wet grass, and earth blending into the quiet hum of life itself. That night, Lydia told them stories of her youth, of a wilder West. "I've seen plenty of folks come and go," she said. "Few ever stayed for love. You two make me believe this land holds more than wind and dust. It holds heart." Caleb chuckled. "You're too kind." "Lydia." She shook her head. "No, a woman only stays when the place feels worth her faith." The next morning dawned clear and bright. Caleb led his horse from the barn, a small leather satchel hanging from the saddle. "Where are you off to?" Clara called. "To town," he said. "I'm buying new wheat seed. I'll plant it in the northern field. You're not afraid that soil's still dead. The more it burns," he said, smiling, "the richer it grows if you tend it right. People are the same way." She watched him ride down the trail, sunlight glinting off the reins, and a rush of emotion swelled in her chest. Love, admiration, gratitude, from ashes and pain. They had sown something living again, faith in life itself. That evening, when he returned, Caleb held a handful of wild roses he'd picked along the road. "They're not as fine as yours," he said with a grin, "but they made me think of you." Clara took them, her throat tightening. "Then I'll press them dry to remember this day." Lydia looked on, smiling softly. "Sometimes the miracle of life," she said, "isn't in grand things at all. It's in two people looking at each other the way you just did." Outside, the autumn wind brushed over the hills, scattering rose petals like music. And inside the little house at Cowboy Hollow, 3 souls each, once marked by loss, now sat together by the fire, listening to its gentle crackle, and knowing that this winter would no longer be cold. Winter came to Montana like the earth exhaling slow, deep and cold. Mornings draped the valley in a veil of white. The ground froze solid before the sun could soften it again. Horses breathed clouds into the air, and the trees stood silent, carved in frost. For the first time in years, Cowboy Hollow was truly ready for winter, not just with firewood, grain, and provisions, but with peace in every heart that called it home. Clara had never known a western winter. In St. Louis, snow came gently, barely enough to stop the carriages. Here, when it fell, the world demanded stillness. The first time a snowflake landed on her shoulder, she felt something quiet stir inside her, not cold, but calm. That morning, Caleb opened the door, and a gust of icy air swept in, carrying the scent of new snow. "Winter came early this year," he said, pulling on his heavy coat. "That means more time indoors." Clara smiled, handing him a cup of coffee. "You'll get bored soon enough. Nothing much to do but tend the fire and check the horses." "Then I'll write," she said softly, "and listen to you tell stories." Stories, he laughed. About what about before? About when you were young, when Rebecca was alive. About how you learned to love this land. He hesitated, eyes fixed on the firelight. "I don't know that I've got much to tell, but I remember this on winter nights. Rebecca used to sing. Her voice was light as wind. When she laughed, I felt warm." Clara was quiet for a while, then whispered, "You still have that warmth, Caleb. Not from me, from you, because you still know how to love, even after loss." He looked up, meeting her gaze. The fire popped softly between them, no grand moment, just the deep, steady peace of 2 souls finally at rest. Later that day, Lydia sat by the window, knitting slowly, her fingers sure despite the years. "I remember the old winters," she said. "When I was young, Folks would gather around the church, singing carols till dawn. Now it's just us, but it's enough." Clara smiled, laying a hand on her shoulder. "Then we'll sing again this year." Lydia, that night. The lamps glowed, the soup simmered, and Caleb brought out an old guitar. His playing was a little rough, but warm, each note trembling with memory. Clara joined in, her voice clear and soft. Lydia followed, her tone husky but kind. Together, they filled the small house with song, and outside, snow fell gently, listening. When the music faded and Lydia had gone to bed, Clara and Caleb lingered by the fire. "Did you ever think you'd be happy again?" she asked. He smiled faintly, the light flickering across his face. "No, I thought I'd forgotten how. But you came, Clara, and suddenly I wanted to live, not just survive." She reached for his hand. "I stopped believing in miracles a long time ago," she said, "but maybe miracles don't fall from the sky. Maybe they happen when people learn to open their hearts again." They sat in silence, listening to the snow outside. Clara leaned against his shoulder, breathing in the scent of pine and leather. No more words were needed. Both of them knew they had come through the darkest part of their lives. The next morning, the sunlight glinted off the snow. On the porch, Clara found a small sprig of pine tied with red string. A note beside it read, "Our first Christmas for the one who brought music back to this place." She smiled, carefully hanging the pine on the doorway. Lydia appeared, eyes bright. "It's lovely," she said. "Maybe this year I'll bake like I used to." "We'll do it together," Clara replied. That night, snow buried the valley in white silence, but Coyote Hollow shone with lamplight. Neighbors came bearing cornbread, smoked meat, and warm cider. Laughter filled the house rare. Precious laughter this land had not heard in years. When the guests left, the three of them stayed by the fire. Lydia leaned back, eyes half closed. "If anyone asked me what I believe in this year," she murmured, "I'd say I believe in rebirth, not just of the land, but of the soul." Clara squeezed Caleb's hand. "Do you hear it?" she said softly. "Even the earth is breathing again." He nodded. "I do, and I want to keep it that way always." Outside, snow drifted down in silence. Clara opened the door, letting the cold air rush in, carrying the clean scent of pine. "Look," she said, "snowfall is just the sky learning to begin again." Caleb stepped behind her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "And I'm learning too," he whispered. She turned to him, eyes glimmering in the firelight. "I believe you, Caleb." He smiled, quiet, certain. "And I believe we've finally found home." That night, they sat together, watching the snowfall, hearts steady and warm. No grand prayers, no promises, only breath, closeness, and the sound of snow against the windows. Coyote Hollow, once scarred by fire and grief, now stood as proof that people can live and love again, no matter how deeply they've been broken. Their first winter passed, not in fear, but in gentle faith, like a small, steadfast flame that would not go out. By morning, sunlight spilled over the frozen hills. Lydia stepped onto the porch and saw the two of them stacking wood behind the house. She smiled, whispering to herself, "If anyone asks, I'll tell them true love doesn't have to burn bright. It only has to burn warm enough to melt the ice around a heart." March 1883. The Montana sun grew stronger each day, and the thick crust of winter snow began to melt in slow, glimmering surrender. Puddles shimmered across the yard, reflecting the pale blue of the sky. Clara stood at the window, watching the water trickle through the garden where the first rose shoots pushed bravely through the thaw. Something inside her softened as if, after a long, frozen sleep, the world was learning to breathe again. Caleb came in from the cold, the scent of horse and leather clinging to him. He dropped an armful of firewood by the door. Snow's melting earlier than I expected. The earth wants to live again. Clara smiled, her hand resting on the window frame. He followed her gaze toward the rose bushes, bare but stubborn, rising through the slush. "You always find life," he said quietly, "no matter where you look. And you," she replied, turning to him, "always know how to protect it." In the days that followed, the ranch hummed with motion. Caleb repaired fences and cleared the fields, preparing for planting season. Clara and Lydia sorted supplies and checked the grain. The air buzzed with purpose, not frantic, but full and peaceful. One afternoon, while tidying the old desk, Clara found a small wooden box. Inside were faded photographs of Rebecca, her soft eyes, her gentle smile, the woman who once made this place a home. Clara lingered for a long time before closing the lid. When Caleb entered, she said quietly, "I found her pictures." He paused, then nodded. "For a long time, and I thought no one could ever walk through my past without stepping on something fragile. But you didn't make me feel guilty. Clara, you reminded me that love doesn't replace it, continues." Clara smiled faintly. "I never wanted to replace her. I just wanted to help you hold on to what's worth keeping." The next morning, Lydia received a letter from town. Charles Benton had been sentenced to 4 years in prison for arson and assault. After reading it, she set the letter down with a sigh. At last, justice found its way to Montana. Caleb shook his head gently. "Not justice, Lydia. Time. Time has a way of setting things right." That evening, as a soft spring breeze drifted through the valley, Clara sat by the stream with her notebook and wrote, "Time does not heal by miracle. It heals by letting us live again, by giving us the courage to love and to forgive." When she returned, Caleb was hammering posts for a new fence. He looked up at her, smiling. "I was thinking, maybe this year we'll expand the garden. What would you plant barley and corn? But over there," he pointed toward a sunlit corner, "I want to plant roses. What do you think?" Clara laughed softly. "You're turning into a gardener. Caleb." He shook his head. "No, I'm planting reminders that every winter ends." That night, Lydia baked apple pie, the sweet scent filling the kitchen. As they sat around the table, she looked at them with quiet affection. "I've seen this land change 100 ways," she said, "but it's never felt more alive than it does now." Clara smiled, "Because the land doesn't just need rain, it needs care. And the caretaker," Caleb added, "needs something or someone to believe in." Later that night, Clara woke to the sound of wind brushing against the window. Beside her, Caleb shifted restlessly, his breath uneven. She touched his arm. The dreams again. He nodded. "Yes, but they're different now. No fire, just you, standing in the field, calling me home." She placed her hand over his chest. "Because you're not alone anymore." By dawn, sunlight poured through the window. Caleb woke with a small, quiet smile for the first time in years, unburdened by fear. A few days later, they visited the small hilltop cemetery behind the ranch where Rebecca rested. Caleb laid a bouquet of the first spring roses on her grave. I kept my word, he whispered. The ranch is alive, and so am I. Clara stood beside him, her hand in his, while Lydia bowed her head in prayer. The wind stirred softly through the pines, carrying with it something that felt like peace. On their walk home, the air smelled of thawing earth and new grass. Clara felt light, as if the world had finally exhaled. She knew that every life had its seasons, and no matter how long the darkness lasted, the light always waited for its turn. That evening, as golden light spread across the hills, Caleb said, I'm going to rebuild the bridge over the creek. Not just so we can cross it, but to remind myself that everything broken can be mended. A bridge between two banks, Clara said softly, or between two people. He smiled. Both. They worked until the sun slipped behind the mountains, the sounds of their laughter mingling with the river's song. That night, as the fire crackled, Lydia announced, I'll be heading to town tomorrow. I think you two can handle things here now. Caleb chuckled. You trust us that much? It's not trust, Lydia said, her eyes kind. It's knowing. You've turned this place into a home. Later, when the house was quiet, Clara sat on the porch beneath the Montana sky, dark, endless, alive with stars. Caleb joined her, saying nothing at first. After a long silence, he murmured, By tomorrow, the last of the snow will be gone. I should start planting. You always think ahead, she teased. He nodded. Because if we stop too long, we forget that the earth still wants to live. Clara leaned her head on his shoulder. And if you ever forget, I'll remind you. They sat together until the warm wind carried the scent of spring across the valley. What they shared now was not the fiery passion of survival, but something quieter, steady as roots, enduring as the soil itself. Spring of 1883 came fuller than ever. After the long winter, tender grass covered the flats. Colts kicked and chased one another across the pasture, and the stream on the hill sang its easy song. Clara stood on the porch, hands muddy, shirt flecked with earth, smiling as she watched Caleb show a neighbor boy how to turn the soil. That smile of his, easy, untroubled, felt like the best reward for all the storms they'd come through. Cowboy Hollow was no longer the place she'd first stepped into with fear and loneliness. It had become a home. One morning, Lydia brought out a basket of new seed and said, This year we're putting in pumpkins. By fall, you'll see this field shining gold. Clara laughed. Then I'll plant more roses along the fence somewhere for the bees to rest. Girl, Lydia said, eyes kind. I once thought you were only passing through Caleb's life. Now I see you're the part he was missing. At noon that day, Caleb came back from town with a leather-bound book. He set it in front of Clara. Had the binder stitched this for you? You write too well for the wind to steal your words. She looked at the journal. Moved? You've read what I write. No. He smiled. I just know you write, and that's enough to want to keep it safe. She touched the first page and wrote a single line, Coyote Hollow, the place where people learn to stay. By afternoon, they went out with Lydia to the field. Caleb opened the head gate on the new water line, and the creek spilled through the pipe into the rows, spreading across the dark, ready soil. Sunlight caught the mist and made a small rainbow. Clara laughed like a child. Caleb just watched her, smiling. You see, he said, all it takes is water, earth, and a little faith and life comes back. And love, she added softly. That evening, Lydia warmed the soup and uncorked a bottle of old cider. To the first season, without fear, she said, raising her cup. Caleb tapped his against hers, then turned to Clara. "To those who dare to stay," he said. After supper, they sat on the porch. A thin new moon hung in the sky. Silver light poured across the valley. Clara leaned against Caleb's shoulder, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Do you remember the first day I came?" she asked. "I do," he chuckled. "A small, stubborn woman who told me straight she wasn't someone to be ordered around. And now you order me around every day, and I'm glad to listen." She laughed and patted his chest. "You never changed your nature, Caleb. You just let the best of you be seen." Silence settled soft, not heavy. The wind carried the faint scent of roses. Caleb looked toward the creek, the moonlight shining on the water. "I used to think life was only a string of losses," he said. "But I've learned loss clears the road for what's truly worthy to find you." "So do I," Clara answered. "If I hadn't lost what I did, I'd never have learned to cherish what's ordinary this much." A week later, Lydia planned a short visit to her sister in Helena. Before leaving, she warned, "You two had better eat properly. I don't want to come back to find you living on coffee and roses." "We'll be fine," Clara laughed. "Don't worry." Lydia rested a hand on Clara's shoulder, gentle as a blessing. "You've given this house its breath. Don't ever doubt that." Once Lydia left, the ranch grew quiet. Caleb and Clara worked side by side all day. At night they ate by the fire, sharing a warm, companionable silence. One night, while Clara was riding, she heard Caleb in the stable. She went out and found him stroking Samson, the black horse that had survived last year's fire. "You're still up?" she asked. "Samson won't sleep. Whenever the wind blows like this, he gets restless, like you." He smiled at her. "Maybe, but with you here, I'm not afraid of the wind anymore." She stepped close, hand resting on the horse's neck. "Sometimes peace is scarier than storms," she whispered, "because we're not sure we deserve it." "You think you don't?" he asked. She lifted her eyes, bright in the lantern light. "I used to know only how to run. I'm still afraid. Caleb afraid that someday you might lose me." He drew her into his arms. "If that day ever comes, I'll find you again, wherever you are, however long it takes." They stood like that for a long while, wind in their hair, the Montana night wide as forever. When Lydia returned, she found them mending the fence. "What needs that fence so strong?" she teased. "So the wind won't carry off the woman I love," Caleb said. Clara flushed. Lydia only laughed. "Then I can rest easy." By month's end, Clara opened a small school in the old barn. Children from nearby ranches came to learn their letters and read aloud. Caleb built benches and a chalkboard. Each afternoon, the sound of lessons and laughter rolled across the fields. When the children ran home, Caleb stood watching, pride shining quiet in his eyes. "I never thought this house would know children's voices," he said. "It does now," she answered, "because it's a real home." One evening, when the chores were done, Caleb took up the guitar and sang the hymn Rebecca had once loved. Clara joined him. His voice was deep, hers was light. Together they blended like wind and earth. By the fire, Lydia's eyes blurred. "You too," she said softly, "turned sorrow into music. That's the truest kind of miracle." Before bed, Clara wrote in her journal, "Every storm passes. What remains is not ash, but seed. Some people come not to change us, but to let us be ourselves for the first time. Fully." Next morning, the sun washed the valley in gold. Caleb and Clara led the horses to the field. The breeze was gentle. The land lay open like a fresh canvas. I used to think I only needed someone to arrive. Caleb said, voice low. Sure. Now I know I needed someone who would stay. Clara squeezed his hand, and I stayed. They rode up the hill together, from the crest. They looked down on Coyote Hollow, once a place of loneliness, now shining in the light, in the wind of the west. All the old losses seemed to dissolve. What remained was land, flowers, and two hearts once broken, now beating as one. Clara and Caleb's story isn't just a romance between a brave woman and a man who once lost his faith. It's a journey of healing two souls, learning that happiness doesn't come from running away, but from staying together. At any age, we can lose things, but the finest grace of life is our capacity to begin again, even after we've been broken. Sometimes silence isn't hiding, it's how a heart learns to love once more. If this story touched you, please like, share, and subscribe so we can keep spreading this message of kindness, courage, and faith in love. No matter our years, the heart can still be reborn.